I just think that the biggest reality of all of this is that, unfortunately, failure is a part of the process of having perspective about investments, about perspective of the world. If you don't fail, then it's hard for you to really have good perspective about how to approach life. And so, not that anyone should strive to fail, but you can't be afraid to fail.
Welcome to Innovate or Evaporate, the podcast where we explore the relentless pace of change and the innovators who drive it. Each episode, we dive deep into cutting-edge ideas, breakthrough technologies, and the fearless pioneers reshaping our world. Today, we're joined by Super Bowl champion Tarek Glenn. In this special bonus episode, he opens up about his journey from the NFL to co-founding Dream Alive, a youth mentorship organization. We talk about innovation in sports, community impact, and the mindset shifts that come with reinvention. From core health to core values, Tarek's story is a masterclass in using influence for purpose and how true leadership shows up long after the final whistle. If you're ready to be inspired, challenged, and equipped to navigate the future, stay tuned because it's Innovate or Evaporate.
Today, we are going to talk to a Super Bowl champion. I'm so excited. Tarek Glenn is here with us in the studio. And just a few highlights. First-round draft pick out of UC Berkeley, right? A three-time Pro Bowl selection, a Super Bowl winner in 2007 with the Indianapolis Colts. We were talking a little bit before we stepped up here on stage. Yep. I was at that game. It was absolutely amazing. And then the co-founder of Dream Alive and now board member of Dream Alive. And so I'm so excited to talk with you today, Tarik, because innovate or evaporate. And a lot of people think that innovation only applies to, technology or some kind of science project. But innovation is so much more than that. And we have this thing called Rally, where so innovators are not just investors or entrepreneurs. Everybody has a finger in the innovation pie. Mm-hmm. So that could be educators, sports athletes, philanthropists, foundation leaders, policymakers. Everybody has a finger in the innovation pie. And so I'm kind of excited just to talk through with you today how you approach things from a sports standpoint, maybe what impacts you had growing up that caused you to think differently, how to approach work ethic when you went into sports. How did you reinvent yourself if you had to at different levels? So let's just kick it off there, maybe like how you think about innovation at a high level, and then we'll dive into some different pieces and parts.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly have to say that a big part of innovation, is just mindset and personality. I like to say that I'm a very entrepreneurial thinker, and whenever I land in spaces, you either can kind of get along with the status quo, or you could show up and making your unique impact on that space. And I think that's where innovation starts, right? It doesn't always have to translate into a idea no one has ever thought about. It's really about bringing our own personal, unique experiences to a space and figuring out what does that look like? How does that transform and change that space into being something different, something special? And so, yeah, when I think about innovation, that's the first thing I think about.
I think that's a great point. Inventing the wheel, right? That's a brand new thing. Mm-hmm. But there's been all kinds of innovation on top of that since we had a stone wheel. And I think back to my personal experience, a lot of the things I've innovated on were not brand new ideas. It was taking something that existed and
that's right.
How do you make it better? So are there some things that how did you get that mindset? Like, are there things that stuck out in the way you grew up or your childhood upbringing, that moments in life where it caused you to actually, you know what, I want to do something different than that, or things you gravitated towards because that's the way things should be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that makes us unique as people is that we're all grounded by our core values. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do is just to be authentic and true to who I am. And understanding that what comes along with that is understanding that, we're all complex human beings. There's a lot of identities that intersect that makes us who we are. And so the fact that I'm from Oakland, I'm a black man, I'm married, I have 4 kids, I'm college educated, the list goes on, won a Super Bowl, X, Y, and Z. I think that identity intersection, it makes me a very unique person, makes me somebody that when I show up into a space, I'm going to provide something different than what you've ever seen before. And just really like looking at my lived experience as one in which brings expertise to the table. Um, I think that's where innovation starts.
Yep.
Yeah.
So um, when you were coming through football, let's dive into kind of innovation sports first. Yeah. So self innovation,
that's right,
or technology innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, like, were there things that, so you look at the competition, right? Because everybody has competitors, whether, business or life, personal, whatever, you've got competitors. So you're competing for a position on the O-line.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the competition, like, how did you think about how you innovated the way you worked out, how you prepared? Like, what are some of the secret sauces that you tried to leverage?
Yeah, and that's a great point. So one of the things that I did towards the tail end of my career was I did cross training, and so I'll never forget when I was in college. We had coaches who played around with the idea of, hey, we're going to take all the old linemen out and box, take boxing lessons. And it kind of started there, but then when I used to play hoop and basketball, and people would always comment on how quick my feet was. Well, one of my best friends was a basketball trainer, and he was just like, yeah, man, one of the things you could do for your cardio, for your footwork, for your agility, is to just do some of the basketball trainings. It's something that you enjoy doing, but at the same time, you're getting in shape, you're working on your quickness, you're working on your footwork, you're working on lateral movement, all of the above. And it was a way that I could just work on something totally different and integrate a form of training that's unique and different that a lot of my counterparts weren't doing elsewhere, and hopefully that was going to give me an edge.
That's really interesting because, like, I feel like in sports today, so my son's 17, junior in high school, and it seems like that the schools and the parents very much push their kids into one sport.
That's right.
And so our kids don't. I'm the same way. When I grew up, we played 3-4 sports. 2, 3, 4 sports.
That's right.
At least 2, not 3. So we're pushing everybody now, all of our young kids, this whole next generation to specialize in one sport, which could be causing an adverse. We think about innovation and how to be well-rounded. It could have the opposite impact of what we're hoping to do by hoping to make them excellent, but actually we're making them maybe not excellent.
Well, and I think also too, like we just get very bored as human beings. I mean, it's like, I was like a 8, 9, 10-year veteran, going into the same facility every day, doing the same workout routine. And I think one of the things that just really brings like a fresh perspective, a newness to your experience is adding something different.
Yep.
I mean, that gives you similar or even better results. And so I would liken it to also just like a lot of times when we think about innovation and technology, we're thinking about performance, but a big part of performance isn't always based on the actual technology. Is also based on like kind of behavior. It's just like how does human beings we respond to something different, something new. It reinvigorates us. It makes us feel like, man, it's bringing new energy to the table. And it's always been like that. Whenever you get the new iPhone or the new TV comes out, it may not even be as good as the old one, but the fact that it's new, the fact that no one has it yet, it just makes you feel a little bit more special, and it brings some like new energy to the table.
So today we have here in a little bit, the Sports Tech HQ and Elevator hooking up. We have an event going on while the NFL Combine's in town, and talk about the future of sports starts here. What are some of the things from a technology standpoint as you were going through from, if you think back to junior high school, all the way through the end of your professional football career? What was the last year you played football?
2007 was the Super Bowl.
So that was the last year?
Yeah.
So what a way to go out on top.
I know.
That's like the dream.
I know. I know.
So think back to like the technology that you leveraged and then maybe what you talk with, assuming you still talk to a lot of athletes today. Are there any technology things that pop out in your mind that holy cow, this made a big difference in either my personal performance or the team's performance? And then with things you're hearing about today, is anything pop out on how technology that could take sport, various different sports to a whole new level of fan experience or player performance, team performance?
I mean, it's a ton of things. I mean, so like, I mean, I feel like, just given the fact I'm 48 years old, I kind of fall right down smack into like sports technology and just kind of like the integration of technology
Yep.
and sport. I mean, I can remember, I'll never forget, I tell my kids this all the time. I might have been maybe 8 years old when I remember Gatorade first coming out, and just like the commercials and just
Yeah.
yeah, and this whole idea of just hydration,
Right.
and how that will like translate into better performance, and just so and then so because that happened when I was 8, just seeing just all of the different things that people tried, when I was either playing, high school ball or college ball, or even, when I was in the NFL, when they were giving guys Pedialytes and just trying to make sure guys, just stay hydrated. But just this concept and this idea of, where things started versus where it evolved into. I think about like when I first got to Indianapolis, we played in the RCA Dome on just really AstroTurf,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing just kind of how like, you know, now they're going into the field turf, and then now they're saying like maybe the field turf's not that great, and then they're going back to grass field, and just really seeing, and having the data and the evidence to back up just kind of like how some of this technology advancement, whereas in the short term may look like it's doing great things, but over a long period of time, they're starting to see that maybe just kind of like this the old fashioned grass is the best for you, and so I mean, those are just kind of just like two basic things that kind of I feel like were huge technology advancements during my lifetime. But then, man, I mean, I have younger kids, and so just just seeing like the heart monitors that we used to wear when we worked out, and how they were trying to just kind of monitor our heart rate and while we worked out, and trying to like, see like our peak performance, and how long it took for us to get at our maximum heart rate, and how that like translated into the type of workouts that we had. I remember the integration of like core workouts, where it was just like, when I first started, it was about brute strength, like how much do you squat, how much do you bench, and then a lot of the technology advancements translated into like really, yoga, Pilates, core stability, that, if you have that foundation down, then, and building off of that. And so, yeah, there's just been a ton of advancements, like throughout my athletic lifetime, but then now seeing, at the end of it, looking back, just how much things have advanced, and why we see performance just continuing to, get better, is because, a lot of these athletes have, technology that's, informing how much they need to sleep, how much they need to be, hydrated, how much they need to eat, what kind of food they need to eat, all of the things, from what we put in our bodies to how we train, those are just all of the, just the different things that we're seeing that's just, just making the performance of what we see just improve.
I think it's really interesting. We have all these advancements in technology, we can hook all these cables to our bodies and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it starts off with the foundation and the core, right?
Right.
And you mentioned hydration. There's a friend of mine, her name's Sarah Cotterill, and she's big into, hydration, water,
Yeah.
and how like that basic component, in whether it's in sports or in your personal life or in business or your occupation, if you're not hydrated and if you don't have good gut health, like there's a lot of things that are going to go wrong if those things aren't kind of in check.
That's right.
I think it's fascinating. And I do feel like we have these massive technological advancements happening, but we also have this whole this momentum around our core health, right? Food is fuel, and then hydration, right? Your gut health.
That's right.
I think that's pretty fascinating. So, okay, so you retire from football,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're like, I gotta reinvent myself, probably, right?
That's right.
What's next? And so you co-found Dream Alive with your wife. And how did you get to that point? How did you decide I'm gonna start Dream Alive? And let's talk about a little bit about Dream Alive and your vision and what your work there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the unique experience of a professional athlete is that, especially one that lands in a city and a state that they're not from, is that, you show up with this like appeal, this spotlight about performing, athletically and what that brings. But I think the whole concept around, doing nonprofit work, philanthropy, especially with athletes who come from places where I come from is that, you always have this mindset of, man, there were times when I didn't have a lot. And I want to make sure that when I do have something, that I'm maximizing my platform and making sure that I utilize it in such a way where I'm impacting the spaces that I show up in. And so that was just something that was a vision of mine earlier on. And a lot of the reasons for that is because of the different programs and people who've impacted me when I was growing up. I just shared at a Dream Alive luncheon that I was at, where one of my first mentors, was a guy who I told him that I was going to go to the NFL, but his response to me was that he sees more in me than I saw in myself. And that there was a scholar inside. There was like someone who was passionate about community and had, passionate about family. And in order for me to be able to have those type of impacts, I had to cultivate those aspects of who I was and not just focus on one thing. And so going back to specializing in one thing and neglecting the fact that we're complex people, we have more to offer life than just that one thing was just a really important, reality that I was able to have somebody emphasize, in my college career. But going back to Dream Alive, because of those type of experiences, when I showed up to Indianapolis, that was something my wife and I definitely knew what we wanted to do. Um, we didn't necessarily knew it was going to look like it looks today, but we knew that, man, try to create something that, brings a community around a need in the community, especially communities that were communities that I grew up in. Like when we showed up in Indianapolis and I seen the Mapleton Fall Creek area at the time, it was just like when I walked around, it reminded me of East Oakland. It reminded me of just like, it was a food desert at the time. There was just a lack of resources. When you go inside of the schools, there were kids who were in, you know, um, remedial classes and 16 years old, still in middle school, and just realizing that there's a system out there that's just like failing our young people. And then there's a gap and someone needs to fill the gap. And so Dream Alive was a mentoring program, really built around like trying to build a bridge between the wealth in the city and the needs in the city. And how do you bridge that gap, showing people that, hey, there are programs that we can invest in that is actually investing in people, investing in our next generation.
So what are you hearing the most, or what do you see and hear the most from our kids, right? From that, I mean, that's all we have is our next generation, right? And so if our next generation isn't like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like ready to take that hill, what are some of the things that you've done at Dream Alive that is helping like shift the tide, right? Bend the curve and
Yep.
shed more light, shed more opportunity. Like what are some of the things that you're doing that you feel like you're kind of breaking through, or the kids are gravitating towards?
Yeah.
And then also, what are some of the biggest obstacles that we still got to focus on
Yeah.
to help break down barriers?
Well, I mean, I think it's two things. The first thing is like, experiential learning. So it's just basically like learning by taking field trips. It's one thing to tell young people about who they can be. It's another thing to go show them.
Yep.
So just like, when you go on like job shadowing and just like different career visits, this is a skill set that young people develop at a young age where they start to recognize that what I'm aspiring to be looks like something, and it typically doesn't look what I thought it would look. And so when you take a kid to go see a dentist, they didn't know that the dentist came from the same community that they came from. They don't know what it takes to become a dentist, a lot of or an engineer. And so a lot of the times, just really breaking down some of those just um a lot of times like our imagination, creates these like uh images that something takes more than what it really takes in order to become it. And so, just really when we do these career tours, we show up in spaces where we just have the different employees in the space just really break down what their experience and what their path looked like. It's just like, look, I went to Arlington High School. And then I got a scholarship to go to Purdue for 4 years, and then I got my first job, and that's how I got to where I'm at as a CEO, and just really hearing that, man, that path can be very attainable, more attainable than, becoming an athlete or an entertainer,
Yep.
and I think that that was just really the goal and the strategy behind taking these field trips is just really exposing young people to their community makeup. A lot of times when you're from inner cities, you don't have economic wealth or development in your space, and so there's a lot of abandoned buildings. Nothing but barbershops and liquor stores and car washes. I mean, it's just like, it's very cliche, and you see it in all of our urban cities throughout America. But when you like go like just a mile or so outside of that, like few mile radius, now you start to see law offices and hospitals and engineering firms and architecture firms and the pharmaceutical firms, the Eli Lillys of the world, the Roches of the world, the Salesforces, and kids will look at those big buildings and like, what's in those buildings? Like how, those are unattainable. And when you realize that there are people associated with it, people within your own community that you go to church with, that you go to school with, that like you're not far removed from those careers, it totally makes like some of those opportunities more accessible. And so the first was experiential learning mentorship, but then the second was really teaching our young people that they had something to give. And so we do a lot of philanthropic work with the students that we mentor. So a lot of these students could easily be recipients of a lot of the things that we do for the community, but we partner with different community programs, especially around Christmas, to really, find ways to give back and allow our young people to be a part of that process, because giving is just a part of who we are as human beings. It gives us dignity, because we all have something to give. It doesn't necessarily have to be monetarily, but it's definitely something that is a part of our makeup and a part of it just makes us complete. And so, just really allowing them to be a part of that process just totally transforms their mindset, because really philanthropy isn't about, like having pity on somebody or viewing somebody as a victim, but it's really about investment and empowerment. And I think when you think about just this idea of tech and business and put a business mindset on those things, it's just like, everything is about like looking for opportunity, investing in it, and seeing the growth. And I just think that people are the same way. And I think a lot of times we write people off because we don't see the potential. And so having mentor programs that kind of focus on one, having experiences that students haven't had before, and two, the philanthropy part has really, set us apart from different mentoring programs.
Are you going to the schools to provide those experiences? Are you going to the schools and partnering with the schools, or are you partnering with someone like a boys club or someone else, and so that those are after school experiences? Or are you getting into the
Yeah,
school day?
yeah, we get into the school day, so we'll partner with the schools. Like, depending on the school and the district, we'll have different type of programmings. But most of the time, we're there during lunch, there during after school, having relationships with the principals. A lot of our site directors, people that are on the site, have their office space, classroom space inside the school facility, and so I mean, most students wouldn't even be able to distinguish them apart from, the school staff. But the reality of it is that it's a partnership when our employees integrate into a school and really provides that supplemental support that the students need in order for them to be successful.
How many schools are you in today?
That's a good question. I think right now we're in about 10 schools. The goal is that we have an initiative to double our programming. And so we're definitely looking into different districts to get into and have conversations with different districts. But right now we're solely in IPS.
So I think you're spot on. I mean, that is such a massive impact. So like you're literally, I'm going back down memory lane as you're talking, and um, I wrote an article recently on like what do our children hear, right? When we interact with them, and um, like I remember I grew up on Title of Farm on particle board, right? We were poor,
Yeah.
but we'd go on these yellow school buses and we'd go on a field trip.
Yep.
And literally, as you're describing that story, I can still remember this one memory today, very distinctly, going down the interstate. So I grew up about an hour north of Indianapolis,
Mhm.
and so we went to Conner Prairie.
Yeah, I know kind of prayer.
And so we're on 465, and we're going down the road, and I look over, and there's these 3 pyramids, I remember just peering out that window, that bus window, like who works in there? Who like? What if I could work in that building that someday? What if I had to wear a tie to work someday? Now, none of us want to wear ties, but but like, and so I think it's so spot on, right? When you get the kids out and expose them to various opportunities, various environments, and they hear stories, right, of folks who did A, B, or C, right, and what that path looked like for them. Um, it can be so inspirational.
Well, stories break down paradigms.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we all have that's what allows us to be able to communicate and process information as human beings. We have, basically boxes that we compartmentalize life in, and that's how we make sense of life, and, but what breaks down paradigms are stories and experiences. And so I'll never forget driving to, what's the school up north, that David Letterman went to,
At Ball State.
Ball State. We're driving up to Ball State. I'll never forget on a college visit, we pass, I don't know, 96th Street. And I swear one of the kids said, I don't think I've ever
Been past
been past 96th Street.
Wow. Yeah.
But it reminded me of growing up in Oakland. I really never been to UC Berkeley until I got recruited there.
And that was what? How many
No,
miles?
I mean, literally like 8 miles away from where I grew up. And Stanford is about, 18 miles from, 20 miles from where I grew up. So the reality of it is that, you have these proximities to these just institutions and companies that provide so much economic and, institutional and academic, wealth to the community, but you don't feel like you have access to it.
Yeah.
You feel like these barriers exist.
Feels like a million miles away.
That's right.
But it's right there.
That's right.
That's powerful. I'm almost about to get a little emotional here. I'm gonna be careful. But like we start thinking about the kids, like it's amazing. So, well, what's next for Dream Alive? What are your next plans? You're talking about doubling the schools that you're in.
Yeah, doubling the schools that we're in. But
What's the biggest need that you guys have?
well, I mean, those are two different questions. I think the biggest need is just really being able to scale it and grow. Because a big part of growth sometimes doesn't necessarily mean like, if I own 10 McDonald's, building 20 McDonald's. Sometimes growth can look different, depending. So like when you scale something, you always want to make sure you're careful in doing so because, you want to still be able to have like similar impact. I don't
Yep.
want to have, 20 site locations, but then have like half of the impact. Right.
Right.
And so yeah, I think we're really wanting to be able to scale in such a way where we're having similar impact because like, the need for young people in our community to have access to um to be able to see the community for what it really is and to really see that they have access to career paths, is really important to us. And we know we're only touching a very small subset of kids, relatively speaking to the whole city. Um, but one of the things is just really, just thinking about like even how to integrate technology into what we do to really provide a potential opportunity for this to impact multiple school districts. Do we want to continue to just be like running programs? We do want to run programs, but it's just like, does Dream Alive actually have other components to it to where it's also offering technology to schools? Because if accessibility is a problem, technology can solve accessibility problems. Is it, a big part of who we are and what we do is like we create natural communal ecosystems. And so it's just like, I heard one of our alums speak today at our fundraiser. He talked about just, being able to like, you know, really speak to all these connecting points that led to their success. It's one thing to say, this person helped me and this is why I'm here today. It's another thing to say, because of this, that person, this person, that person, this person, this is why I'm here today.
Yeah, the
And
entire journey.
and the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I feel like, when you think about, venture capital and you think about just success of businesses is not necessarily about one person. It's about this like interconnected, it's about the one person understanding that, man, I got to leverage all, there's a ton of leverage points that I got to be tapped into in order for success to happen and the timing of it all. So, is there opportunity for that, in our programming or just outside of our programming, but also being able to provide that for the city, to really be able to meet the need. And so I just think that there's just a lot of, as we think about growth, there's just also a lot of questions, that we need to be asking about, like, what does effective growth look like? And does it necessarily have to stay within the umbrella of, how we're doing things now through programs,
Yep.
And then I think another big passion of mine is just, when you, like my unique journey in Indianapolis was interesting because I'm from the West Coast. I showed up here. I built a ton of relationships because of the Colts and because of Dream Alive, you know, but all of it, I think was very organic and wasn't intentional. It's like, when you show up in a place and you feel the value that you're providing to the city, and then you see how that's reciprocal. But like a lot of those, like, initial board members and people that I met that really supported Dream Alive, supported me, supported the things that the initiatives that I spearheaded, you know, like if you're more intentional about that, then, thinking about like what future investments in the city could have looked like, like in terms of just like me staying here and investing in the city in a more strategic way outside of just dream alive. And so I think, there are a lot of, the older that I get, the more that I see, how some athletes have just done a very good job of just leveraging their platform. It comes with intentionality. It comes with, showing up in a location, recognizing that, not only am I here to bring an entertainment value to the city, but there are also other aspects of me being here I can leverage that can not only, serve me well now into the future,
Yep.
but it also can really add value to the city.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the things that we've been talking with our mutual friend Emil about is, you know, like everybody moves around, and sometimes in sports you move around to 3 or 4 cities over the course of their
Mhm.
career. But how do you create these intentional connection points, right? In the ecosystem, right? The professional sports is another set of nodes in the ecosystem. And like, how do we get more intentional about connecting those athletes to other wealth building opportunities?
That's right.
And I can't even imagine being a professional athlete, and they have to have hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming at them, wanting to get a piece of, even just emotionally, right? Like not even money, but just emotionally.
Yeah.
But like connecting, intentionally connecting those athletes with funding opportunities in high growth businesses,
Yeah.
for example, where let's say a company is doing a million or a $3 or $5 million raise, depends on what portion of their journey they're in. But in typical high growth companies, you have pre-seed, which is like pre-rev, and then you have seed and Series A, which is kind of up to 2 or 3 million in revenue,
Mhm.
and then you kind of have the $7 to $10 million revenue companies that are
Yep.
risk adjusted, well on their way, and like figuring out how to intentionally connect the professional athletes with that ecosystem, right? To be able to invest alongside other dollars, to create additional long term wealth
That's right.
after you hang up the cleats
Yeah.
or hang up the jersey. Um, did anybody ever offer those opportunities to you as an athlete?
Yeah, not in that way. I mean, I think that a lot of investment opportunities came my way, but I think, this whole idea of investing in startups, it came and died early on in my career. And then I think it recycled back into like becoming a thing, toward, you know, like early on, when I retired, and so I think because of some, failed investments, quite to be quite frank, I've, just been very, risk adverse. But but I don't necessarily feel like that posture serves me. That doesn't serve me well. No, let alone that's not the necessarily what I would advocate for people. But I think do what I would advocate is like when it comes to investments, you got to do what's comfortable for you.
Yes.
You got to be educated on it, but going back to how do we like get athletes looped into this world. I think it's really starts with them understanding their value and what they bring to the table, and then therefore how does that translate into partnering with different brands.
Right.
And I feel like when I see athletes show up, and especially at the height and at the peak of their careers athletically, I think you don't have to be as risky during that time because what's the attraction and the attention that you're bringing to any partnership, you know, um, to circumvent that risk. You know what I'm saying? And on some levels, it's like because I feel like what some of the conversations that we've had previous to this is that it's important for the city, for companies to understand just kind of what those individuals do bring to the city, and how you can leverage those relationships to translate into just a lot of wealth, not just for them, but for the city and
Yep.
for yourself as a whole. And so sometimes that takes an investment, that investing your time in teaching somebody the trade, investment in your time and like helping them understand how to, assess, the environment and the trends and helping them participate in just low risk opportunities so that they can
Yep.
see and learn from, the process, but I think what happens is that when people see athletes, they become targets and then a lot of the targets are, just very egregious and risky and really, really bad. And so that bad rap, that bad image has translated into making it very difficult for athletes to participate. But to your point, I think that there is a more intentional way that we can get them more active in those some of those high growth opportunities.
We talk with angel investors all the time about this similar concept in like when it comes to it's like allocations, like in your life, like you have so much time, so you allocate time for personal, for family, for God, for business,
Yeah.
right? And you've got to allocate. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. It's no different with capital,
Mm.
right? Like we see a lot of angel investors that let's say they've kind of racked up a few $100,000 in cash and they want to become an angel investor. And so they make 2 big bets or 3 big bets, right? At 100,000 a piece, let's say. And the power law applies to business. And the odds that investor will lose all $300,000 is about 98%.
That's right.
And so think about in terms of allocation. If I'm going to put money towards something like that, maybe it should be like 5%. Or of whatever I have to spend with that or invest with that, like it should be 5% or maybe 10 max, but probably closer to 5%. And that goes in that bucket. But then it has to go in a bucket where that can be 100 bets. And then I can follow on with 20 of those bets and then 10, right?
Yeah.
And so you have the ability to invest in the winners of the winners. And then the power law comes into effect. And then the odds of getting a 3 or 4x cash on cash return, pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
What pains me is nobody pauses and kind of like works through with angel investors or professional athletes, et cetera, who are not in that business for a living.
Mm.
They don't take the time to say, this is kind of how that business works. And so if you're going to get into it, don't do it unless you kind of do it this way, which reduces risk.
That's right.
It's pretty interesting.
No, I mean, I just think that, I think that philosophy and what you speak to speaks to the athlete as much as anyone else in terms of just kind of understanding, why you should participate, and when you should participate. And, like you said, just hedging your bets, making sure that, if you do this, understand it like, you're investing in 100, not just one.
Right.
And, the likelihood of 3 or 4 of those hitting, and then how much a percentage of your, salary or net worth do you want to even participate in high growth, and why you should, participate with that percentage, and what you should be doing with the other 95% of your, So I just think that, I mean, it really is an educational process, and it would be one in which, I think if an individual isn't willing to invest in just understanding the process, then I wouldn't recommend them participating.
Agreed. Tarek, this has been amazing. We're gonna head into the rapid fire round.
Okay.
You can say pass or say whatever comes top of mind. There's no right or wrong answers. We're always curious at what people have to say. So we'll just cruise through these.
All good.
So what is one thing in your industry, and you can pick professional sports or Dream Alive, but what is one thing in your industry that you think people should stop doing?
I think in the industries and college sports and in philanthropy, people need to stop looking at human beings as victims. I think when you look at someone as a victim or as somebody you look at them as somebody who doesn't have anything to contribute, like you have to give them some sort of hand-me-down versus looking at them as an asset that you can invest in, that when you plant that seed can flourish and grow and be self-sustaining.
I love that. That's powerful. What is one thing, it could be a process or a habit, that you think leads to the best ability? So one thing, process, habit, that you think leads to the best ability to disrupt or innovate?
Oh, definitely asking questions. I feel like, like one of the things that I've learned being in higher education is the better questions that you can ask, I think the more you can disrupt, any type of like mundane situation. Like
Yep.
you can start to really get to the core of the why
Yep.
and if the how makes sense. And so yeah, asking great questions, like, yeah, definitely.
If you could solve one problem in the world with innovation, that could transform our lives, if you could solve one thing in the world with innovation that could transform our lives, what would that be?
That it wouldn't be trendy. I feel like for some reason, innovation is associated with trends.
Yep.
And I think that that's the that's the bad part. I don't know if those two things have to be associated with each other, but they are. It's almost kind of like that's the like easy way to get people attached to something.
Buzzwordy.
Yeah, to make it a trendy,
Yeah.
versus like really true and healthy innovation is just like, progressive development,
Yeah.
growth, and we all would ascribe to that. But I think trends just come and go and don't necessarily have a lot of depth to it.
What is one thing that we haven't talked about today that you want to share? What's one about yourself or one thing that we didn't talk about today that you want the world to
Yeah.
know about?
I mean, I just think that the biggest, reality of all of this is that, unfortunately, failure is a part of the process of like, having perspective about investments, about, perspective on the world. If you don't fail, then it's hard for you to like really have good perspective about how to approach life. And so not that anyone should strive to fail, but you can't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And understanding that when you do fail, that there are cycles of life and seasons of life, and when you're you just telling me about your experience, like when you were going through a hard stint in your business, and you know I've experienced it in pro sports. It's just like, whether it's in a game or in a season or in a career, that there's always just seasons of life where you feel like, man, it's just over. This not gonna last that long. And then there's always the other side of the storm. And so like, yeah, we can't be afraid to fail.
It's awesome. Tarek, this has been amazing. Thank you for joining us on Innovate or Evaporate. And until next time, by the way, how do people find Dream Alive? If they want to help contribute or add value, how do they find you at Dream Alive?
Yeah, dreamaliveinc.org.
DreamAliveIn.org?
Inc.
Inc. DreamAliveInc.org. DreamAliveInc.org. Go check out the website and let's get some folks out there listening or watching this to contribute to Dream Alive and help a bunch of kids get have a better journey.
No, I appreciate it, brother.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tarek.
All right, cool.
This episode was brought to you by Rally, the global cross-sector innovation conference. Learn more at rallyinnovation.com.